Mixing with Mike mixing tip, monitor references, and the Audified MixChecker plugin. In this video, I wanted to take a quick look at a new plugin by Audified called the MixChecker. And I want to point out some fundamental ideas about monitoring, because this is not something new. This is something that's been going on for quite a long time. The idea is that when creating a mix, obviously in a control room or particularly on the pro level where you're dealing with much higher quality acoustics, higher quality of amplification and speaker systems, one thing that can happen is that environment can sometimes be a bit sterile, a bit analytical, sort of like a surgical kind of monitoring situation where you can hear everything so clearly that it can sometimes lead you to be a little bit lazy about the way that you go about mixing. And the result of this ended up causing an evolution in monitoring, which was bringing in monitors that were less than ideal. And this was the evolution of the Yamaha NS10 being brought into studios to use as a mix reference. Now, this was not necessarily the only set of speakers. In fact, most mix engineers would set up 2, 3, or even have 4 sets of monitors in stereo or mono in varied configurations, set up in the control room on the console meter bridge while they were mixing, or on stands in front of the console if that was the way the setup went. In most recording studios, there would be big speakers that would be typically mounted in the wall, soffitted in the wall, so they may be anywhere from 12 to 15 feet away from you, maybe even farther away depending upon the size of the control room. That would be like 3 to 4 meters, essentially, something along those lines, and or 4 to 5 meters, excuse me. And the idea there was by going through different reference speakers, and you would essentially not get your brain kind of wrapped around a particular way of monitoring system and a way of listening. And the result of this is important because what would happen is if you have a set of monitors, regardless of their flaws, you will mix to those monitors naturally. In other words, if those monitors don't push a lot of bass and the acoustics of the room don't push a lot of bass, you will find that your mixes have too much bass in them because you'll be driving more bass energy in them to get them to sound the way that you want, even though those speakers don't naturally exist that way. And so when tuning yourself, like as a sort of standard principle or operating principle for working in studios, one of the things I would always do is I would bring in a CD that would have a lot of my favorite monitoring, like great mixes of commercially released material. And what I would do is I would play that before starting to mix that day. I would get a sense of what my hearing was like, what the monitoring system was like, and going through and setting up my different monitors so that they're ideally situated. And this is something that most people do. Some people mix just with headphones, or they mix with the monitoring system that they have in their bedroom today. So today, one of the problems is that the acoustics of the home studio person who's making mixes is less than ideal. And so the Audified MixChecker is a great tool specifically for that type of a situation. And I'll explain how this expands beyond just in-studio monitoring, like I was just talking about, because it was very typical in studios for people to have NS10s, and during, especially from like the mid-'80s on, self-powered monitors started to come in. One of the first sets were Meyer HD1s. That I saw come into the studios, and then that expanded into many other monitoring systems. So the quality of monitoring improved significantly right from there. People started to bring in more high-quality reference monitors that were more stereo, high-end stereo home hi-fi monitors. And the quality of monitoring started to progress rapidly. The issue is that the way that we listen, and when we start listening to a particular monitoring system, your brain will start to get used to it. So if you start listening to a monitoring system, you start running sound or mixes through it, and it's like, oh, they sound really bright today. What'll happen is after about a half an hour, if you continue listening, they won't sound bright anymore. Now, the frequency response coming from the speaker hasn't changed, but you've changed. The thing is that we're not machines. Unlike a microphone that, when set up in front of a speaker or capturing any sound, will capture it exactly the same way every time, with the only variables being the environment and humidity, et cetera, and the program material being fed through. and but it'll always be consistently the same. But our brains and our hearing system is not that way. We experience fatigue, and our brain is constantly adjusting our hearing system as a way of compensating for problems it has in intelligibility of whatever it is that's listening to. So if you start to put music on, the speakers sound really harsh, your brain will start to compensate for that so that the music starts to become increasingly more intelligible. And what will end up happening is if you continue to mix without taking breaks or giving your ear any other reference, what ends up happening is a fatigue that sets in, a form of temporary threshold shift. And then what will end up happening is the next day you come in on fresh ears and you realize that everything that you're listening to is insanely bright or too harsh or too bassy or some variation thereof. So one of the ways, and I want to show you how to use this specific tool, and I think it's really important because not everybody can afford to have 3 sets of monitors or 4 sets of monitors. And even when you're printing your mix, it's not particularly convenient to go bouncing MP3s or AAC files or even WAV files and running out to your car, running out, sending it off into your iPad, feeding it into your laptop, and kind of, running around and putting it into every medium that you have. So what we have here is a plugin where what they've done is they've set up different sources. This is a classic studio monitor that looks very much like the NS10. You have an Oratone looking speaker here, an over-ear headphone, iPhone, or basically a smartphone, what they call a smartphone, like an iPad or a tablet, a laptop, a car, and a television. This one has antennas on it, so obviously it's an old school television. A small micro hi-fi system, probably, that would have like a subwoofer, another antenna little radio. So this guy is old school putting together this plugin. Speakers that are for computer, desktop speakers, and in-ear headphones. So by going through these different selections here, you will get different tonal variances. Now, one of the problems that you'll find with this is that our experience in terms of what we hear is inextricably connected to what we see. So sometimes when you put on something that creates a coloration like headphones, it won't necessarily sound natural to you if you're monitoring that through speakers, because your brain is set up to, has already been programmed to say that speakers sound like this and this sounds like this, and when I'm in this environment and all the other acoustic binaural cues I'm getting are giving me a certain characteristic and something feeds in differently, it's going to sound off at first. So it's a plugin that I think you have to kind of work with it a little bit and kind of get used to it. Now, essentially what happens here as a form of compensating for this is a bypass control. And if you turn it off, then it will give you a straight feed of the basic equalization tonal curves that were are characterized as part of this plugin, or maybe emulated is a better way to put it. If you have a small speaker system with a low-end driver, like a 5-inch driver, somewhere in that area, then this will create some compensations that work more for that. If you have an 8-inch driver or a larger studio monitor, then it would create compensations for that. And if you're working with headphones, then it would compensate for that. Now, for the purposes of doing this, I'm going to do it with headphones. So if you want to put on a set of over-ear headphones, this would be the best way, because this is the one thing that practically everybody has. And I can't accommodate going through all the different settings of 5-inch, 8-inch, and off and all of that. Although I'll just to show you what the differences are, I'll kind of go through them quickly. One thing to note with this is that when you're working with it, the bypass, without the speaker system, the gain will be higher. So just be very conscious of that. Now, the idea, and most of what happens here, if you look at it, all of these altered monitoring systems tend to lend towards the consumer environment. So this is something that is just as suitable for mastering as it would be for mixing. But in the mixing stage, you have the most control over what things go on. Now, for the most part, what I find the most difficult to get to translate between all speaker systems is the bass, particularly when you get to speaker systems that are like on smartphones and tablets and things along those lines, where the low-end information is very low and non-existent. And so you have to somehow craft a an area in the bass sound that will help that to kind of poke through, because you're going to lose the frequencies. There's no way to get around that. Things that occupy the low frequency energy are mostly like kick drum and bass, but the kick drum has a point to it. The attack usually is represented in a frequency area that is within the realm of most speaker systems, even small speaker systems. So if you're in an area that's maybe 400 to about 2K, you want to have pretty much everything in your mix represented pretty decently well in that area. And if you have that, even though you may find as you switch through systems that, as a system gets brighter, obviously things that are brighter like cymbals and hi-hats and stuff like that are going to sound louder in the mix. There's no way to really avoid that in any meaningful way. And you don't want to go chasing around everything either. So if you're running your mix through and it's like you set up the tablet and then all of a sudden you're starting to make like all kinds of crazy adjustments to the top end, and then you go back to your speakers and your mix sounds really dull, you don't want to do that. So you can't compensate for every listening environment and the way that everybody listens. People will do that on their own. What you want to do is you want to find a medium where your mix translates as best as possible. So let's go through and listen to a little bit of the mix without any processing and start there.
Do you know how many people own your car? Every time I see it, I wonder where you are. The things that made me laugh now, they make me cry. I miss the way I felt.
Okay, so now with this mix, you notice there's an L2 afterwards. There's nothing going on with the L2. All that is doing is making sure that the video has good level and is not peaking or clipping. So there's no limiting going on there. It's basically just a protection area to make sure that that doesn't happen. So let's go through some of the different options. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stay here. I'm going to work with headphones here, and we'll just start with NS10s, and then I'm going to toggle through some of the options. And I want you to notice the balances as they shift from different instruments. Vocal, particularly bass, I want you to focus on, because I'm going to look at that a little bit in this demonstration.
Do you know how many people own your car? Every time I see it, I wonder where you are. The things that made me laugh now, they make me cry. I miss the way I felt looking in your eyes. So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I dropped. I keep retracing my steps, going through the index, trying to find out when my life stopped. And just like in a sunset, in the heat of the moment, got my hand on the trigger. I'm ready to go, watching your every move, every step, everything that you do, killing any piece of me I left in love. 'Cause I'm heartache's assassin.
Okay, so as you go through the different options, and I kind of went through more or less pretty quickly, but what it was kind of odd, if you just think about it, how do you emulate headphones using headphones? It can sort of get a little bit odd, but you can really get the proximity of the low end, which is really an artifact. Now, all headphones are different. There's so many different kinds, and if you go through, other than the first two emulations, which are obviously of classic speakers, the NS10 and probably an Auratone, then as you go through the others, each one, not all smartphones have exactly the same frequency response. There are different size tablets, and they'll have different frequency response patterns. Same with laptops, that can vary pretty dramatically. Cars, and there's so many different cars. You can't get into all the variables, and that's not important. What you really want to do is notice how much balances in particular change Frequency responses will change, but you really want to pay attention to if the basic levels of different instruments more or less stay stable as you switch from monitor to monitor. One of the things that I noticed, and I'm going to switch over to the smartphone here, is that the bass has a tendency to really disappear in here. So I'm going to solo it up and see if there's something I can dig out of this. Now I boosted 700, which is typically like a good area to boost. And that sounds like a little bit much, so I'm going to just take a quick look to see what else that I have here. Okay, so I have on this, let's see what I have here for a mid-range boost. I could also get this on the E channel. So I want to see what this sounds like here.
I miss the way I felt looking in your eyes. So I keep looking around with my eyes on the ground, trying to find the confidence I know I've dropped. I keep retracing my steps, going through the events, trying to find out.
So that one adjustment helps it to work better on the bass. So now if I go, I can hear the bass more clearly here as well. The other one was a TV. I thought it was low on. And it comes through a little bit better there. So the idea there is, if you find that there are certain things that are particularly consistent throughout, like if you found that every monitor that you went through was harsh or sibilant sounding as you're going through, you may realize that, okay, maybe I'm kind of accentuating that a little bit much against, what would be my normal monitoring environment, my normal listening environment. I think perhaps there is where headphones can be maybe a little bit of a better measure. Especially headphones today are so much better than, the quality of headphones has improved dramatically over headphones of the past. So much of what you get out in the market, and you've seen a lot kind of enter in as, has made that work a lot better. So it makes it a little bit easier to kind of get some references. But I really like this plugin for exactly this reason. And we could kind of go through some different things. I may listen to the guitars and maybe have a little bit too much bite overall, so I might lower, some of the frequencies there to give them a better tonal balance. And of course, I always want to check this bypass back to my main monitor so that when I'm listening to it, I'm not doing something to compensate for a consumer device and then creating some crazy imbalance. Like, in other words, I don't want to raise the bass level up by 6 dB so that it comes through a tablet and then it just flattens out or collapses the mix and becomes too dominant in the regular mix. So there's always balances in there. That frequency in particular with the bass, you have to find the place in the mix, the hole in the mix where that bass note can come through, and that way the person listening can hear that part. It has to really be felt more than heard. In other words, the bass is not the predominant part. That's not what people are listening to the track for, but you don't want it to disappear either, because that bass part in this particular track kind of drives along with the drums to push the momentum of the track. So when you switch to something like a tablet or the smartphone, what ends up happening is if that disappears, then you start to lose some of the groove of the track, and you never want that to happen. But these are the basic things to look out for. And it's a really valuable tool if you really understand the basics of how we hear and the ways that you need to get your mixes to translate from monitoring system to monitoring system. This is a big part of the mastering process as well. So mastering engineers will take the work that you've done in the mix, and if you kind of work on the subtle side, make sure that you can get things feeling right in all these different mediums, then generally the mastering engineer, when they reference, will have an easier time managing your mix and not trying to make up for things that are more easily made up for. That was a very easy adjustment for me to make on the bass in this particular mix, and it makes a difference in terms of the translation. So anyway, a very important thing, a very important concept that's easy to overlook or easy to be lazy about. Because quite often mixing can take quite a lot of time, and so in the process of wanting to finish it, you may not want to go through all the monitoring situations to make sure it really works. But that little extra effort in this plugin can make a lot of that a lot easier. And it'd be interesting to, and I haven't done this yet, to go about doing this, and then after working with it, making the adjustments, going in and referencing the two mixes in your other environments, like your car stereo and things that you know well, your home hi-fi system, feeding it through your television, etc. There's a Mixing with Mike tip. Monitoring references and the Audified MixChecker plugin.